Thank you, Dwayne and Bev, for kind hospitality and hosting. I'm honored by your kind words. Thank you. And just one real delight the last couple days. I felt like the president was security assigned to me, but it turned out they just wonderful hearts for God and hearts for me, and instead of like just being security, they've just been a beautiful servant's heart. And so I want to say thank you to Freddie and to Selenia for just loving me and taking care of me, and I'm grateful to you. As a kid, I was a misfit, a geek, a nerd. Every generation has a word for it. I didn't fit in. I could tell stories for hours. I won't. I know what time it is, but I'll tell a few. From about third grade on, school was absolutely miserable. I made straight A's, but I was a failure socially. I was quiet, I was shy, I had thick glasses, and I read a book a day. That's the definition of perfect target. I'll never forget my first year on a baseball team. I was on the Swallows. That's pretty humiliating. Other teams had names like the Tigers, the Cougars, the Yankees. We were the mighty Swallows. And then in a true sign of budget cuts, we just had a big G on our hat that no one could ever explain. We were just the Swallows with a G. We were horrible. I got one hit all year. I can still see it in slow motion in my memory. It was the last game. I was 0 for the year. I was leading off the inning. The pitcher reared back, threw an inside fastball. I swung with all my might. The ball went sailing into the ground right in front of home plate, rolling down the first base line. My mom stood up. She was yelling, "Run, Rodney, run!" My teammates were all screaming. I was in shock because my bat actually hit the ball. And after a moment, I took off running as fast as I could and beat the throw to first, stood there acting like I'd been there before. Crowds all cheering. It was right out of Hollywood. It was awesome. My first ministry opportunity came in Fargo, North Dakota. It was my big break when Wanda Rothwell, the pastor's wife and children's pastor, asked me to come to children's church and assume an important role. That's right, I was the pink bunny. Pretty important ministry role. It's hard to imagine that today I talk in front of crowds, but then I was petrified to talk in front of an English class. A book report was an absolute nightmare. 6th grade, my family moved to Moorhead, Minnesota, and it went from bad to worse. Junior high can be a cruel place. The memories are painful. I remember the names people called me. I remember the coach who would belittle me in class and in basketball practice. I remember one day we were doing a wrestling unit in gym class, and he thought it'd be funny to make me wrestle the biggest football player in the school. And so he put us both on the mat and had everyone else just stand around the mat so they could all laugh and jeer at me. I worried constantly. I made myself absolutely sick every day when it was time to go to school. There were so many nights, so many mornings that I just laid on my bed and I cried, "Mom, please don't make me go. I can't do this anymore. Please don't make me go again." I was a perfect candidate for homeschool, but they didn't do homeschool back then. One of the most significant moments of my life came in my freshman year of high school. I was sitting in Mr. Sellent's algebra class. I can go back to the desk I have. And I said something to the girl in front of me, Beth Grayson. She turned around, looked at me, and she said, "Don't talk to me. I don't talk to people like you." And I laid my head on my desk, and I tried not to cry, and I prayed, "God, I will never be like me again." I said, "I'm going to change," and I did, but not in a healthy way. I don't have time to tell the whole story, but I began living to prove to people that I wasn't a failure or a reject. I was determined to achieve and to succeed, to earn acceptance and respect from people. The determination to succeed and prove myself to people put me on a treadmill, running and striving and trying to achieve, but never quite getting there. I spent 6 or 7 years searching for a new definition of success, God's definition. There were really 3 moments that started my search, all kind of painful, requiring a little bit of vulnerability to share. The first, at 18 years old, I made a list of my life goals, everything I wanted to accomplish by age 35, because at that point, that's how long life lasted, was 35, and then you're dead. And I knew if I reached those, I would feel good about myself. And I did it. By age 35, I'd accomplished every goal, but it still felt empty. I still didn't feel like a success, whatever that is. Second one, I set a goal for our church to reach 2,000 in worship attendance, because that's success, right? We measure success as a pastor by how many people are in the building and how much money's in the offering. So more people and more money, then obviously I'm successful and accepted. And I just knew if we reached 2,000 people, I'd feel really good about myself. So I'm not proud of it, but every morning when I walked and prayed, I'd actually pray, God, help us be a church of 2,000. I believe we're supposed to be a church of 2,000. God, help us be a church of 2,000. The morning after we reached 2,000, my prayer shifted. Lord, I really believe we're supposed to be a church of 2,500. Lord, help us be a church of 2,500. The day after we reached that, my prayer shifted again. I just kept adjusting the target for God. And one morning, walking and praying, the Lord just spoke to me so clearly. Are you ever going to be happy? What's going to be enough for you? The third moment was particularly eye-opening. I was getting ready to speak for missions night at the Southern Missouri District Council. And growing up in the Assemblies of God, I always thought that was it. That was the pinnacle. If you spoke at a district council, you were the man. That was success and acceptance. The officials were sitting on the platform. I asked to sit in the crowd. Sitting on the platform makes me extremely self-conscious. So I'm sitting there down next to the host pastor. Well, they do all the things they do at a district council. My mind started wandering, and you have lots of time for your mind to wander. This is my first time to speak at a district council. I started thinking, if I do good, think of all the invitations that'll pour in. I'll be in every district. I went all the way with it in my mind. It was the Rod Loy World Tour, stadiums, the whole deal. I was an emerging superstar. And thank God it wasn't time for me to speak yet, because suddenly I realized how much I was missing it. And God whispered in my heart again, so this is it? This is what you're living for? This is success? And I had a God moment of my own while they were doing whatever it was they were doing. And I just prayed, God, forgive me. Let me be faithful to this assignment and share a heart for broken and lost people. Forgive me for thinking more about pleasing these people than pleasing you. Help me be faithful in the moment. When I was done speaking that night, I did something I've never done before or since. I walked off the stage. They were praying. I walked off the stage, out the side door, got in my truck, left the building, left the city. I didn't even wait for the check. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't wait around for someone to say, Rod, good job. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'd already fed my own ego way too much for one night. I didn't need to hear it from anybody else. See, there's a subtle and sometimes not so subtle pull towards self-promotion. You've got to build your brand. You've got to get your name out there. You've got to make sure everybody knows who you are. Let other pastors know how many people attended, how many people are on your staff, how many campuses you have. You got to make sure everyone knows about your success. And I don't want to be that. It's the opposite of Scripture. What did John the Baptist say? John the Baptist pointed at Jesus while he was losing followers and said, he must increase and I must decrease. See, there's a principle. You can't exalt Jesus while you're promoting yourself. The two are mutually exclusive. I began searching for a different way to live. I desperately wanted to get off that treadmill of setting a goal, then reaching it, then setting it higher, not feeling good enough, setting it higher again. I knew there had to be something else. And then one day I got a word from God. Now, it always makes me nervous when people say that. When the conversation starts with, I have a word from God. Because in my experience, most of the time, it's one of two things. It's goofy or it's mean. I hadn't been pastor long, and we were going to have a night where we talked about sexuality, and the men were going to talk in one building, the women in the other, kids in another, and so that the parents would come. I knew I'd need to do something for their kids, and so we booked a guy to come, and I made one of the biggest mistakes of my pastorate. I announced that we were having a gospel magician. I said that word, magician. Now, I know now I'm a seasoned veteran. We did not have a gospel magician. We had a gospel illusionist. But I didn't know that, and then no one explained that to me. If you're new in the pastorate, this is free. This is not in a book. This is not going to cost you anything. Don't ever say the word magician or magic from the pulpit. I did. And the next day I got an email from Anita, and she said, I can't believe you're doing this. Even what you say you're doing right, you're going to introduce our children to the occult. I thought it was just a magician. Little did I know, Satan himself was going to entertain our kids. So I didn't give a good enough answer. Now I know the right answer. Then I didn't. So she called our district superintendent. He didn't give it a good enough answer. She actually talked to the general superintendent of the Assemblies of God about me and my magic. Now, I felt pretty comfortable her going to him because I knew that he'd had a banquet, that he just had a gospel illusionist at. The morning that we were going to have that night, the morning of that night, I was in my office. I'm always in my office early on Sunday morning. You are too. You can't sleep on Saturday nights. And at 6:30 a.m., I got an email. It said, Rod, even while you say you are leading people to heaven, you are leading my little children straight to hell. And it was signed, Jesus. By the way, Jesus has an email address. I have it. It's AOL, so he's all that's keeping it alive, but it's there. Word from God, when God has a word about politics, that really confuses me. And every election, it seems like God contradicts himself in politics. This last election, I had somebody that first God told them I was supposed to get up and say Donald Trump was God's appointed messenger. And then it was only a few weeks later that I was supposed to get up and say that God had told me that Donald Trump was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's like we serve a schizophrenic God when it comes to politics. We had a funeral at our church. A Salvation Army major in town died. He was pretty well known. The mayor said, I can guarantee you Rod's building, they'll host the funeral, which that was fine. And I wasn't even doing the funeral. I'm there, I'm the host. And I got an email the day before the funeral from somebody who said, the Lord told me to tell you this, tomorrow is not supposed to be a funeral, it's supposed to be a dead raising. And then at the end, I promise you it said this, P.S., if you've already tried this, that's okay. God still loves you. How do you respond to something like that? Oh, I already tried to raise him. It didn't work. I had a guy one morning came to me, Pastor Rod, I have a word from God. I'd never seen him before. I said, oh, goody. He said, here's what the Lord told me. You're not supposed to preach this morning. Instead, we're all supposed to go outside and march around the building 7 times. I thought for a moment, I said, dude, do you know what happened last time they did that? And another time, a guy walked up, right before I'm supposed to go up. He said, I got a word from the Lord. Said, hit me with it. He said, when this song's over, I'm going up there to speak. I said, Really? He said, yeah, I am. I said, well, we got a problem. Because I think when this song's over, I'm going to go out there and speak. I've got a big guy who sits by me on the front row who's saved. And he's listening to this interchange. And he looked at the guy and just deadpan, he looked at him and said, I'd rather hear Rod. I was like, okay, that worked. So, I mean, words from God, they're interesting, but my word from God wasn't weird or mean or spooky because it was actually from the word of God, which is my favorite kind. My first search for success and acceptance, a different way to measure myself, led me to Paul's letters. And I began to read them over and over again. I reformatted them so I had real wide margins and different translations so I could write notes and read what I read the last time through. And I just read them through different grids. I do that often. I'll read looking for one thing. My word from God came from the book of Galatians. You're all better scholars than me, but the book of Galatians is a letter written by Paul to a group of churches in the area of Galatia, area of several hundred miles. He visited those churches on his first missionary journey, and it was an area where Paul had problems. They tried to stone him, kill him. Now the church, Paul's gone, church has a problem. The gospel of Jesus and his grace was under attack in the churches. There was no room for grace. There was no opportunity for restoration. If you messed up, you were out. People had taken sides. There was gossip, division, infighting. The leading Jews were saying, the only way you can get to heaven is if you keep the law, and they had their own set of rules that was you had to do to be approved and accepted by God. And so the church was struggling with this artificial standard of not scriptural, but set by people who left no space for grace. And to be good or successful or accepted, you had to achieve a certain level of rule following piety and holiness. And the new Christians were finding that impossible. The church was in trouble trying to figure out, who do we listen to? Who do we believe? Who do we follow? What does it mean to follow Jesus? What's success in following Christ? Which sounds kind of like today. There are a lot of different voices telling us what it means to be successful and what we have to do and what's success as a believer, as a minister, as a person. How do we measure our lives? In the course of his letter, Galatians, Paul asked 3 key questions for them and for us to consider. And that morning, after my prayer time, reading the book of Galatians, those 3 questions jumped off the page at me, and they became a new grid for evaluating my life, a way to live according to grace instead of artificial standards of success. And I asked myself the questions multiple times a day and with every key decision I make. At some point in your life, you're going to have to address these 3 questions. In ministry, you'll face these issues at key critical turning points where decisions are required. Answer the questions wrong, you'll be sidetracked. Many people who have walked away from God and failed did so because they weren't ready for these questions. I actually wrote a book about my journey, and the title of it very originally is called 3 Questions. It's a different way to evaluate success and failure, a grid for learning to drop out of the rat race. I'm a horrible salesman. I brought none with me, but they've got a few in the My Healthy Church exhibit, and you can get them. Now, have I arrived? Am I there? Nowhere near it. But I will tell you, I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago. You wouldn't have liked me then because I didn't like me then. I measure my life now by a different standard, by God's approval. I'm more peaceful. I'm more settled. I'm finding success and approval in a different way. If you knew me then and you didn't like me, I just want to sincerely apologize to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I viewed you as a competitor rather than a brother. Please forgive me. I recognize that was wrong. And even though I knew how to say the right words, in my heart, I wasn't thinking the right things. And I apologize to you. And I will look just at one of these 3 questions found in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10. Here's what Paul wrote. Am I now trying to win the approval of men or of God? Am I trying to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. I've had that verse used against me many times. When someone wants to do something as a church that violates the law or is in rebellion to my spiritual authorities, and I say no, they counter with, are you trying to please men or please God? In other words, the only way to please God is to please me. And most of the time when people say you should please God instead of men, what they mean is, I know what God wants you to do and you better do what I say. That's a wrong application of this verse. This verse is not designed as a weapon to use against people who don't do what you want. Instead, it's designed as a personal question. It's one you have to ask yourself. This question addresses motive, and you get in trouble when you try to judge someone else's motive. Instead, use this to question your own motives. Who am I going to please? Whose approval am I living for? You have to decide, do I want the applause of men or the applause of heaven? Do I want to live my life so people are happy or so God is happy? Facing rejection as a kid made me particularly vulnerable to this fall. Pleasing people, craving and needing, desiring acceptance. I seem to be preloaded for seeking approval. And I wish I could tell you that when I became pastor, all that just ended, but it was still a hugely out of balance area for my life. I needed you to accept and approve me. This question was huge for me. Am I trying to win the approval of men or God? Am I still trying to please men? If I were trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. How many of our sins or failures are caused by the wrong answer to this question? By trying to please people instead of please God. It's the business person who compromises and lowers his or her standards. The thought is, how can I ever network and fit in if I don't do what they do? It's the person who spends money they don't have to impress people they don't even like, but they just have to have it. It's why parents worry so much when their kids go off to college, because they're afraid their son or daughter will be faced with this question and give the wrong answer, that they'll choose to please people. It's the pastor who avoids a difficult truth because he knows it's going to cost him popularity with his people. I preached one message 3 years ago on sacrifice that grew our church by minus 100 people one day. I did a series on persecution and suffering that cut our online church in half. That'll mess with your mind. Now, they all came back when persecution and suffering was over. I actually had one guy in our church say, hey, Pastor, I just want you to let you know I'm not going to be here the next 3 weeks. There's a church across town talking about grace, and I'm just going to go over there. The temptation is to avoid that. You want to be accepted and included and approved of and loved, so you choose to please people instead of pleasing God. And you say, well, I want to do both. Well, there's a problem. Paul says you have to decide. You can make your goal pleasing men, or you can make the goal being a servant of Jesus. If you live your life to win the approval of men, you can't and won't win the approval of God. And the funny thing is, no matter how much you try, you can never please everyone. Have you ever felt like that? You can never win the approval of all the people, because as soon as you please one, a different one's unhappy. And the quest to win the applause and approval of people always ends in failure. There are too many different voices. There are too many different standards. You wear yourself out trying to please them all. In the end, you fail. So I thought it'd be interesting. For 2 years, I logged every criticism I received. With Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and blogs, people now have the ability to broadcast their criticisms instantly. No longer is the filter of having to write it down, find a stamp, send an anonymous letter written in crayon with no return address. Oh, you've got those too, have you? It's awesome. Now people can ignore the instructions of Jesus in Matthew 18 without even hesitating. Now, keeping track, this is one of the dumbest things I did in ministry, okay? So I just want to tell you this is like the fifth thing I'm telling you don't do. Keeping track of all this wasn't so much fun, but when I look at the whole list at once, it reminds me, if I live to please people, I'll never succeed. Now, I don't have time for all of them, because remember, there's 2 years of criticism, and by now you've probably picked up on the fact I'm a lightning rod for criticism, okay? So I get that, gotcha. So I just, tonight, for your listening enjoyment, I randomly picked 40 or so of the criticisms. So I'm going to share them with you just exactly as I was given them. You drive a BMW. One of our church people came to me and said, Pastor Rod, I want you to know I defended you this week. I said, really? What did you defend me? He said, I had somebody say they wouldn't come to our church because you drive a BMW. I said, well, you didn't have to defend me because I don't. You drive a Mercedes, you drive a Porsche. Actually, that's true. A couple in our church heard me talking about my dream car, a Porsche. They bought me a remote-controlled one that I drive around my office time and again. But I drive a Ford F-150, so they missed it. You're too young. A lady said that to me in the lobby, you're too young to be a pastor. I said, come back tomorrow. You fly a helicopter everywhere you go. Really? That'd be awesome. I would. You buy all your shirts at Dillard's. I have no idea why that bothered him, and I don't. And I still wonder if that meant I was spending too much or I looked like a fool. He didn't say. We sing too many old songs. We don't sing enough old songs. We sing too many new songs. We need to sing more new songs. You dress up too much. You don't dress up enough. Pastors shouldn't wear jeans. Pastors shouldn't wear pink. You shouldn't have a water bottle in the sanctuary. You're setting a bad example. Ooh. You shouldn't go swimming. You spend too much time around students. You spend too much time around children. You spend too much time around lost people. I'm just reading them, people. You spend too much time studying. You don't hold up the Bible often enough when you preach. When you hold up the Bible, it's the wrong version. Can't win. One of my all-time favorites was the guy who sent me an angry email, absolutely incensed because I hadn't responded to his anonymous letter. You don't talk about politics enough. You talk about politics too much. You're a Democrat. You're a Republican. You won't tell us what you are. You don't preach enough on the end times. You don't shout enough. Again, last year I spoke 225 times. If I shout, we're toast. You're not Pentecostal enough. I dealt with that one this afternoon, and I wondered, so what do you do if, like, okay, this week I'm going to be more Pentecostal? We don't have enough messages in tongues. That's unique. Like, I control that. Like, how do you decide today we're going to have 3 just to make you happy? I didn't think that was up to me. Apparently it was. You talk about money too much. You should talk about money more. You need to preach more about faith. You need to preach more about grace. You should talk more about prophecy. You don't talk enough about sin. You talk about sin too much. You don't talk enough about salvation. You preach too many salvations. We need meat. You need to talk more about hell. You need to talk more about heaven. You need to quit talking about heaven and hell so much. You tell too many stories about your family. You should tell more personal stories. You should talk more about sex. You should never use the word sex in the pulpit. You are too skinny to be a pastor. You need to gain weight. I got to give her credit. That one was said to me in person. She walked up to me, and it was like I don't know what we were doing. She started here, all the way down. I thought she was checking out my shoes or something. All the way back up again. And she said, you're not fat enough to be my pastor. I said, then we have a problem. Because either I have to gain weight or you have to get over it. I'm not planning to gain weight, so it's up to you. And she didn't get over it. Now, I know you've got great stories about why people left your church. It's got to be the all-time winner. She actually left the church because the pastor wasn't fat enough. You're probably ahead of me. I watched because I wanted to see what church she ended up at. Right? I just want to pick up the phone then, call that pastor. Hey, buddy, if you want to keep her, pig out at every potluck. If she gets on your nerves, join Jenny Craig. Think about it. Less than $5 a day, you can lose 40 pounds and one mean, angry, ugly old lady. That's just 40 of them, people. I could go all night. Can you imagine if I tried to make all those people happy? How impossible would that be? We start a new series every week. I'd be running around like a madman trying to do something for everyone all the time while pleasing no one. There are days it gets to me. One day I began to daydream what it would be like to have a job where you're never criticized. Then I was having trouble thinking of one. Garbage man. He still gets criticized if he spills your trash. Ruled that out. A teacher. If it wasn't for parents and school boards, I thought maybe I could be a drive-through window order taker at McDonald's. Get criticized every time an order's wrong. And then finally, I thought of the one criticism-free job. Think about it. District superintendent. Living the dream, Dwayne. I've only been a senior pastor for 18 years. I've made a lot of mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes has been the way I answered a lot of those people. I tried to explain why I do or don't do it, and it seldom worked. And I learned my lesson. And my answer now is I pray about what God wants us to do as a church. And I'll be happy to pray about that. And if I sense that's God's direction, I will be obedient. I just want to be sure I'm following his direction. This is God's church. Well, I get some reactions. Just a couple of weeks ago, I got an angry email. It started with this. First line, Pastor Rod, don't give me that trying to please God stuff. I tried pleasing people, and it didn't work. I want to please God. I'm going to make that my goal. Am I now trying to win the approval of men or of God? Am I trying to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. I'm no longer living to impress people. I want to please God. Now, here's another misapplication of this verse. I don't care about what you think. I don't care about you. I'm pleasing God. If you don't like it, you're wrong. You can go to hell. That is spiritual abuse and manipulation. You can't use this verse to justify being a jerk who disregards the feelings of others. Instead, here's the feel and tone. 1996, Max Lucado wrote a book about the Beatitudes titled The Applause of Heaven. I want you to listen to this. It's funny because this is not in the book. So if you go to the book and try to find it, you'll never find it. It was in an ad copy, and I copied the ad copy way back then. Here's what the ad copy said. It's what you've always dreamed, but never expected. It's having God as your dad, your biggest fan, and your best friend. It's having the King of Kings in your cheering section. It's hearing the applause of heaven. I'm not living to make men mad. I'm living to make God pleased. I'd love for people to clap for me. I enjoy their approval. I wish I'd gotten straight 5s on the survey. You can't imagine how that messed with me to find out you're going to take a survey on me after I talk. And they didn't let me see the questions first. If I knew the questions, I'd have preached to the survey. Come on, wouldn't you? Some of you preached to the vote. But if I had to, I'd rather choose the applause of heaven. I want to please God. Here's a practical way to think about this. Before you make a decision about your time, your priorities, your church, your ministry, before you decide how to respond to someone, ask yourself, will this make God clap for me? Is God clapping for me right now? Or am I doing this for another reason? If you apply that simple test, it will change how you respond to conflict, how you treat others. It will change your daily priorities. It'll change what you preach, how you minister to people. Am I doing this to win the approval of people, or am I doing this to please God? It is not oversimplification to say. Many people would avoid their biggest mistake and failure in life if they'd simply slow down and ask this one question. If you want to be a lifelong follower of Jesus who makes a difference, you've got to decide, am I now trying to win the approval of men or of God? Am I trying to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. And some of you are thinking, well, this isn't a very good deal. Because you're saying if I please God, people won't like me. If I please God, I can't please men. If I please God, I'll make people mad. I understand why you might think that. In response, I want to quote one verse of Scripture to you. This is one I've memorized or repeat quite often, Proverbs 16:17. Listen to this one. Now, in light of everything we just talked about, listen to this. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. Wow. Isn't that powerful? In light of all that approval-seeking, attention-seeking, success-driven stuff where you can never make people happy, listen to it again. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. Let me kind of put that all together for you. When you try to win the approval of men, when you live your life to please them, you'll fail. You find out it's impossible. You can't say enough, do enough, give enough to keep them happy. Trying to please them is a never-ending quest that ends in disaster. When you're all done trying to please men, not only do you not please men, but you don't please God. But on the other hand, when you live your life and you make your priority pleasing God, when your goal is to gain his approval, then at the end of that, not only do you please God, but when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. When you live your life to please God, you will ultimately gain the respect of men. When you live your life to please men, you will lose their respect, and you will risk your relationship with God, and you will destroy your ministry. When you see it that way, isn't that an easy choice? It's easy when you step back and you look at the choice and the consequences to say, of course I want to please God. It's such a better option. I don't want the applause of men. I want the applause of heaven. There's a note on the bottom of my computer monitor, post-it note stuck there. All it says is this, is God clapping for me right now? What I'm saying, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, am I doing it to please men, or am I doing it to please God? Am I now trying to win the approval of men or of God? Am I trying to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. How different would your ministry be if your singular goal was to please God? How different would you approach each day and each decision you make if it wasn't about your position or your desires or what would make people shout and clap and cheer, but your only goal was to please God? How much pressure would that take off? Listen to me, I'm almost done. Not every decision will be popular. Please God. Don't chase the latest trends just to impress your friends. Please God. There will be times people are unhappy. Please God. People will pressure you to compromise or allow compromises. Please God. You'll be tempted to give up and find an easier assignment. Please God. You may be doubted, second-guessed, or even abandoned. Please God. Pleasing people will be the easy way out. Please God. One of the patterns I pray is the Lord's Prayer. And I get to the end understanding that it was not in some ancient manuscripts, but I still love the doxology of that prayer, and I pray it. And I pray thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. And I say, Lord, thine is the kingdom. This is your church. This is not my church. Lord, you do what you want to do in your church. And would you show me, Lord, what you want to do? I'll just do it with all my heart. I'll do everything I can to hear you and obey. I give you this church. It's your church. You know, it seems like we have an alarming tendency to only give God our church when things are going bad. And then we're like, Lord, this is your church. You can have it. And I wonder if God sometimes looks down and says, I don't want it. Keep your crummy church. Lord, this is your church. Thine is the kingdom. Thine is the power. Lord, I'm not cute enough or special enough to do this without you. I can't talk people into deliverance. I can't convince people to salvation. My words aren't enough. Lord, my only hope is your power and the power of your Holy Spirit speaking through me. Without that, I mean, God, this could be a disaster. And thine is the glory. And I pray this every day. I prayed it today because it's hard for me to speak in front of crowds and to fight that thing within me that wants your approval. It's challenging for me. And so I pray, Lord, thine is the glory. And I pray this way. So I pray today, Lord, if I say or do anything today designed to give me glory instead of you glory, put a catch in me. Put a catch in my spirit and stop me, Lord. Because I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about you. Thine is the glory. And when I promote myself and I say things to position myself, and I still catch myself doing it sometimes, and then I'm just embarrassed and ashamed. When I do that, I know I'm living to please men and not him. When I live to win the approval of men, it's all about me. When I live to win the approval of God, it's all about glory for him. What are you hearing? Are you hearing that from men? Or can you just close your eyes and just faintly hear heaven applauding and God saying yes? You know what? One day we're going to stand before God, and he is not going to say, well done, thou good and successful servant. Right? What's he going to say? Well done, thou good and, faithful servant. I've really thought about how to end tonight, because it's kind of just there, and I can't answer the question for you. All I can do really is ask you the question. So would you allow me to ask you the question and just kind of change the tense of it a bit? Are you now trying to win the approval of men or of God? Are you trying to please men? If you're still trying to please men, then you won't be a servant of Christ. It's really confrontive, isn't it? Is it the applause of people, or is it the applause of heaven? Would you bow your heads with me? And here's what I just really sensed the Lord saying to me, and I completely don't understand, but I'm going to be obedient. And as Pentecostals, we're super uncomfortable with this, so I know I'm about to take you way outside your comfort zone. But would you just do it with me? Because I think it's what the Lord would have us to do. And if I'm wrong, then we'll test that later. Could we just be quiet before the Lord? I can't examine your motive, but I want to challenge you not to just avoid this question, but to consider it for yourself. Some of you got to go back and you've got a meeting with somebody who's really trying to put pressure on you. And you're challenged with whether you're going to please them or please God. And you know if you please them, you're going to lose your biggest giver. Some of you have some difficult situations with critics. And you're going to have to face this question. If you're not facing it this week, you will face it. Please God or please them? And could we just, at the risk of being uncomfortable, we just be quiet in the Lord's presence for a few moments and allow him to speak to us? Would you do that with me?